Car that crashed in Castine in December of 2022, killing 4 Maine Maritime Academy students, is scheduled to be sentenced in an Ellsworth courtroom tomorrow. As part of a plea agreement, 21-year-old Joshua Goncalves Radding, who was also an MMA student, has agreed to plead guilty to 13 of the charges against him, including manslaughter, aggravated OUI, and criminal speed. 4 other charges will be dismissed. Under the plea agreement, the judge can sentence Goncalves Radding to anywhere from 1 to 7 years behind bars. According to court documents, Goncalves Radding was driving over 100 miles per hour when the crash happened. He and his 6 passengers had spent the night drinking at a Bangor establishment. Court records show Goncalves Radding's blood alcohol content was double the legal limit when he was tested almost 2 hours after the crash. He and 2 passengers survived.